The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.
Welcome to our inaugural K4Wins.com show. I am Tony Kurre. I've been doing sports radio for 35, 40 years. Of course, part of the starting lineup. Many things here local in the Birmingham area. We're going to head out to Las Vegas. Keefer, of course, is with the Las Vegas Sun. He is a handicapper extraordinaire. The guy can pick futures like nobody's business. So happy to have him on this morning. Keefer, my good friend, of course, my cohort, of course, sidekick in almost everything I do here with Tony Kurre Radio on TKR. Does a fantastic job, executive director of the Birmingham Racecourse Commission. And, of course, talk about a guy who knows his horses. He handicaps anytime you walk into a casino or a main room and see some horses on TV, you'll probably see Keefer standing by and putting down some wagers. And then, of course, Kai Gregory, a good friend, a man who went 9-0 1 week last year on the starting lineup. An unbelievable display of fervor and valor as far as in his handicap picks go. He has obviously been part of the handicapping business for a long period of time and also formerly of KTB Power Sports. Good morning, guys. How y'all doing? I'm going to introduce everybody one time because we're going with Kip, Kai, Keefer, and Kurre. That's why it's the 4Ks. After that, I'm done. It takes too long to introduce everyone's asses. I ain't going to do it anymore. So, but we do want to get into some college football. We got some SEC play we want to get into. Obviously, a lot of us are into that. We are blessed to know that Case lives, about a mile and a half from the Raiders camp? Is that right?
The Raiders facility, yeah, right down the street. You got it just right, a mile and a half.
So you could spit on it, man. So we're going to be getting some inside information about the Las Vegas Raiders, which is still kind of difficult to say. I've been wanting to say Oakland forever. The Las Vegas Raiders, and I think all three of us was going to come crash at your place, Case, sometime later in this football season. I told your dad, I said, I will be out there at Las Vegas a couple times a year. Since I know I can stumble home from the stadium, which is fantastic. So we'll get that. I do want to throw the first question to you, Case, and then it's round table, guys. So knock yourself out. You have been a staunch person of saying you don't pay for picks, don't ever play for picks, and I think at any point we've all done that at some extent. Maybe we haven't paid for picks, but we certainly have listened to picks. I mean, whenever I see something on ESPN or I listen to this K4Wins show, I want to hear our handicapping things. When you start listening to someone that you really like handicapping games, do you normally stick with that person regardless of the play that they're playing? In other words, if I really like Case Keefer's plays, but I really disagree with you on a particular play, should I stick it out and always play your plays? Because I know I'm not right more than 50% of the time, and I know I got some handicappers that I really like, but I'm like, there's no way I can go with that. Why would I want to bet that side? Do you go all in with an individual, or do you just kind of play it supplementally?
Well, this is probably another difference I have than people that actually sell picks will say, buy my picks, bet everything. But no, I mean, to me, betting is a personal thing. At the end of the day, it's your money you're putting up there. So I think you need to make the most informed decision you can for yourself. And always at the end of the day, it's going to be what I feel. I've been lucky enough to build a pretty decent network and have some success in this racket. And there's people I respect a ton. There's people that I think are a lot better at it than me. So I take what they say and, I try to work it into my numbers and how I look at things. But at the end of the day, I'm going to go with what I think is the best play, and I think that's what everyone should do. I've
gone to Las Vegas about 50 times. I think all of us, we probably have well over 100 visits between the three of us that don't live there. Obviously, you're there. What's it like in Las Vegas when it comes to handicapping? I mean, I can just imagine, because I think at one point Birmingham, Alabama was the second biggest betting town in the United States of America. This is before legalized gambling came into play about 10 or 15 years ago. There were so many undercover guys behind dumpsters here in Birmingham. It was unbelievable. If you couldn't find a handicapper, you couldn't find a book, you weren't looking in the right spots. But what's it like out there? Is it big business, or is it so over the top that people just know not to even mess with it?
I mean, it's still over the top, and I think it'll always have a place as the sports betting capital. I mean, it's like if you and I'm not taking this is what bookmakers have said to me for years, but if you watch Disney movies, you want to go to Disney World. So that's what it's like. If you bet on sports, you want to come to Las Vegas, take it in. But really the sad truth is now with legalized expansion and stuff, like it's not really the capital in terms of the most action now. There's states that, if you look at the figures on a monthly basis, I know New York, New Jersey, probably Alabama, if it was legal, take even more amount of bets. And if the casinos are so entrenched here and the gaming control board is so strict that, we don't have as many sports books as some places. Our offerings are actually a little bit less. Some places now you look and you can't even find, there's so many bets, just thousands of props everywhere. There's quite a bit in Las Vegas, but yeah, it's definitely been a shifting landscape. The one good thing I'd say, it's a lot easier to get money down. Some of these big national books, as soon as you show you have a chance to win, they limit you to pennies on certain markets. I think Las Vegas, we still have several sports books that are more established, and it's easier to get money down, which I like. But yeah, it's been really interesting these last 5 years because, we were the only game in town for 60 years or whatever. Now with it opening up everywhere else, it's a little bit different.
It was pretty doggone sexy when Atlantic City and Las Vegas were the only two places you could make a bet. I'm not going to lie. It was really, really special. And now, of course, everyone's living. I think I saw something like 290 million people in the United States live within 15 miles of a casino or something. It's like, it's crazy.
Well, Tony, it's important to point out, to emphasize Case's point, that yes, it's widespread now and it's available at all corners where it wasn't before. It used to be kind of an exclusive, but Vegas's response, I think, is pretty remarkable because a lot of properties have really, Circa comes to mind, in case you can embellish what I'm going to say, but you've got some facilities now that are built as these the best word is meccas of drawing people that love sports investing and want to come out there. So he used the Disney World comparison. Yeah, there's amusement parks everywhere, but there's only one Disney, and Vegas is still the absolute capital of the world, and the facilities they're building to support the industry, it's still big successful business because there are some really awesome places to play there, and the sports betting industry is thriving, despite the fact that now it's widely available.
We could do an entire show on Las Vegas. You know that. Maybe we will. We can do another podcast. Kai Gregory's also with us. He's going to join us every single week. And normally a guy who's done radio at KTB Power Sports. I used to be host of that years ago. And, of course, has been handicapping games for about 40 years as well. Kai, good morning to you, man. Welcome in, of course, to your show, K4Wins.com. This was your idea to come up with this podcast. We love talking about college football or talking about handicapping, period, whenever we get a chance. I mean, I get a room full of handicappers, man. It's just fantastic. You went 9-0 on our show last year.
Against the spread. We weren't just picking games like game day.
Case was on
impressive performance.
And listen, we're going to be totally transparent here, man. When we suck, we're messing it up when we're doing it, but we feel pretty confident between the four of us. We're going to be consistently on the winning side. Case was just on fire the second half of the season last year. I mean, it was just unbelievable. His futures bets were unbelievable. And thanks again for some of your NHL hockey plays, man. I played some of your hockey plays that got me out of the hole.
Tony was riding in that limo.
Man, I was playing the Florida Panthers to the end, and if they lost after being 3 up, I was gonna lose my brain. And of course, they win the NHL, the Stanley Cup. So we do these plays, and Kip and I were like, I think 26-7 on the show, which is nothing to sneeze at, which is the best I've ever been in my career with anybody or on any show. And here comes Kai. He comes in studio, and we give him 7 games. He goes 7-0 against the spread, and then he picks 2 other games and nails them.
Throws in 2 first half bets, and they both hit.
And people are like, the hell with you two guys. Where's Kai Gregory? Get him on the show every single week. Kai, welcome in. Something I know you've been working on handicapping, looking at the SEC future plays. Talked about what you see. I mean, this is the best time of the year because everyone's 0-0. Anything's possible in this world. We know there's going to be some flashes. There's going to be some jewelry we find certainly in the sand. But talk about some of the things you've seen and give us some plays, man.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. I would be remiss if I didn't start out by saying I'm wearing the Tennessee National Championship shirt.
There you go.
Case picked at 12-1 as one of the futures before the World Series. So I am a Tennessee fan. That may turn some people off, but however, it was a good play for me. I think week 0, week 1 sometimes can be the easiest and the hardest week of the year. There are some great plays out there. I mean, even if you look at just one of the very first games, SMU and Nevada, and SMU opened, I think, at 19. If I'm right, it went all the way up to 27.5 and 28 in some places. This morning it was 24.5. Now it looks like it's back at 26. Movement all over the place, just from a couple of the different sites that I looked at. Case probably can tell you more about that and where that would be. I mean, that's a game that you look at on opening day and you go, okay, well, SMU is supposed to be pretty good. All of these things they're doing, they're going to Nevada. They're going to be up in the altitude. You got to look at all those things. What's going to happen with that? With the coaching situation, I think SMU probably jumps on them early, and Nevada, especially if that line gets back up to 28 or 28.5, I'd love to see a backdoor cover there from Nevada on that. I like, some of these futures, because we're gonna talk, SEC as much as possible here. There's some huge games that people are not going to think about to determine the totals for some of these teams, like Vandy. Vandy opened the season over under 2.5 on their wins. That went all the way up to -200. So now their over under wins are at 3, -40. And to me, I don't ever want to play anything that's over 50% juice. I just think it's crazy. But now they're -40 at 3. But you look at Vandy and you say, okay, I see some wins for Vandy. They can beat Alcorn State and maybe Georgia State, especially since the head coach left. But then you've got Virginia Tech, Ball State, South Carolina to get you 2 more wins for them. Are they going to beat Virginia Tech? Probably not. But so you've got 2 other games to get you over. You're looking at -3, -40, probably a even money there. I really like South Carolina under 5.5 with some key games for them. And believe it or not, and I hate to say it, especially wearing this shirt, Tennessee under 9, just realistic. Even though I think they're going to beat Florida, I can never, ever, ever be confident going into that game because, even since Peyton was there, they just lose. Tennessee loses to Florida. No matter what the situation, no matter if it's 4th and 26 and it's an 80-yard bomb with no time left or what have you. And then there's some other futures that I'd love to hear from the guys just to make the playoffs. Clemson +75 to make the playoffs. Miami +200 to make the playoffs. Nobody's talking about Miami in the ACC. Oklahoma State +700 to make the playoffs. Just some futures that I personally happen to love out there. And then to win it all, Texas +775 and Oregon +700. Just getting some good odds on some teams that are probably going to be in the playoffs, and 1 or 2 games may change them.
Case, jump on that Oklahoma State game. That's really interesting. That's a big nut right there, 700. And of course, Gundy always has those guys. They are always. It seems like every year they start 6-1, 6-2, 7-2. They're always in the top 25, and now we're taking the top 12 teams to make the playoffs. What's the shot?
Good news if we're talking SEC win totals. I bet 10 of them. I did it in July.
Wow.
That's a lot of the numbers have moved. I was just digging back into it. Looks like I hadn't worked on it since July 13th, so I'm glad you guys will get me back up to speed. And I will say I matched with Kai on one of them. Probably not the one he wants, but I did take Tennessee under 9 at -120. I think that's probably moved now. You probably can't get that good a number. But, I just think Tennessee's schedule is really tough. I think the future's still bright, and if Nico's as good as he thinks, as good as they seem to think he is, maybe next year's the year where they can be relevant in the championship picture. But, yeah, I'm under 9 there. And sorry, to get back to Oklahoma State, I'm kind of have an agnostic position on Oklahoma State. I don't have anything on them or against them, actually. I have no problem, though, if that's the team you want to back. I just feel like the Big 12 is such a hodgepodge. It's going to be so much fun. I think it's the conference to watch. I think all these teams look so even. I just get a little bit concerned when, what were we talking about at this time last year? I actually wasn't. I bet Oklahoma State over last year, but the consensus last year was this program's falling apart on itself. They don't have the talent they once have. Mike Gundy's doing some Hail Marys with coordinators. Now, to his credit, they all worked eventually after the first couple months where they had the rough stretch. I know they got pounded by South Alabama, but they ended up being really good. That you saw the emergence of Ollie Gordon. But, I kind of feel like on Oklahoma State right now, the thing that's holding me back a little bit is it does kind of feel like you're buying high. Everyone is a lot higher on them than they were a year ago. That being said, they're definitely one of the teams that's in the mix in the Big 12. And I didn't ultimately make any bets against them, but I didn't make any bets on them either. It's just the Big 12 is so tough. So it's kind of pick your poison. And if it's Oklahoma State, shop for the best number and find it. Someone's getting to the playoff from that conference, if not 2. So 7-1 doesn't sound like a terrible number.
Kip, this is go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's 18 teams, and I literally think that 14 of them you can make a case for that it's the craziest league probably ever compiled in college football history because they have done a good job of trying to stay relevant by bringing in some established programs, but it's coast to coast. It's from Orlando all the way out to Provo, Utah.
Crazy.
And Case and I think, have talked about a little bit looking at the overall field, and there's got to be some really attractive prices. Case, I think you even said you put a small bet on Baylor, who was just a ridiculously long price. And Baylor's coming off a terrible year, but the conference is so wide open. I know we want to emphasize the SEC, and that's what I do in all of my shows and things I'm involved in. But the Big 12 is fascinating coming into this year for me.
Yeah, I bet Baylor 100-1. Just because it was 100-1 basically, and I think there is some proof of concept there. I don't think they've done a great job under the current administration, but they won the title once. I've always really liked DeQuan Finn from Toledo, who's coming in as their quarterback, and I really like their new coordinator, Jake Spavital. I talked earlier about network and listening to other people's opinions. There are people that I think are better at college football betting than me that say this is going to be a disaster, that Aranda is going to be the first coach fired. So I'm not saying I love Baylor or anything, but like I said, there's some proof of concept there. I like some of the guys that are in the key places. So I think I bet a little bit on them over 5.5 too. And 100-1 to win the Big 12. Like I said, I think it's wide open.
Three of us are calling from the Birmingham area, doing the show from the Birmingham area. So obviously a lot of thought and process goes into the Alabama-Auburn situation. I do want to throw those totals out because I think it's really interesting. Alabama's lowest total projection since 2008 at 9.5. And again, Kip, you just mentioned it, man. You're throwing out, of course, a Texas and Oklahoma. This is going to be a little bit like a Pac-12. Seems like it was every year before it fell apart, where you have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 teams in the top 25. Then all of a sudden everyone starts beating each other up. But what's your thoughts on Alabama being 9.5 coming from ground zero right here, 45 minutes from Tuscaloosa? Kip, what's your thoughts on, of course, Coach's first year, first time in 17 years, Nick Saban's not on the sidelines?
My first thought is that Vegas does an extraordinary job setting the win totals. If you really, because I'm into something this time of year that a lot of casual fans aren't. I know Kai and Case are on board with this too. I really look forward to carefully scrutinizing the schedules of as many teams as possible, because you hear all these opinions. Well, this team's going to be really good with these players back, and they're coming off a great year, and this coach knows what he's doing. The schedule is so telltale for what's going to happen, because I went through a lot of schedules, including Alabama and Auburn, particularly because I know we're going to focus on them throughout the season, and I look for what I call hot spots on the schedule. Potential losses is basically another way to put that. And every team in the SEC now has a much tougher slate of games. So some of those numbers, everybody can't be 10-2. Teams are going to beat other teams. I'll use a primary example. Georgia and Texas are both 10.5. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's moved since in recent days, but 10.5 means that for them to go over, they can't lose more than one game. And the schedules, both teams have 4 or 5 real hot spots. Georgia, actually, if you look at their schedule, of the AP Top 25 that just came out, Georgia plays the number 4, 5, and 6 teams. Alabama, of course, Ole Miss, and Texas, and they play all 3 of those on the road. So I would say that's 3 pretty considerable hotspots. Plus, Georgia and Texas play each other at 10.5. Somebody's going to lose that game. So that's going to be the only loss that those teams can sustain and still be over. So I think you start right at the top of the league and you look at Georgia and Texas. To me, I think both of them are very vulnerable. In terms of betting them, everybody's predicting 11-1. They both, can go 11-1, but it's not likely. Texas plays Oklahoma. Texas has a ridiculously tough game at Texas A&M, which is going to be the wildest game of the year because that rivalry is so intense. I just think the schedule's fascinating this year, and again, everybody can't be 10-2 and 11-1 in the SEC. So I think some under bets are going to be pretty appropriate, because games that you can kind of concede. Alabama goes to Wisconsin in week 3. Now, you would think just from gut reaction, they'll handle them. They've never been to Madison, Wisconsin before. That's going to be an absolute wild place to go. I've been to a game at Camp Randall. It's more of an SEC atmosphere. I just think that there's those kind of games that people are just chalking up as wins, and I don't see that. So maybe I'm looking at it from a skeptical standpoint, but I think a lot of teams are going to be under the total at the end of the day this year.
One of those new teams in the SEC, Oklahoma, their over-under is 7.5. Sounds a little low, but also a team right down the street here, 2 hours south of us, the Auburn Tigers. Hugh Freeze going into the second season, also 7.5. You're in their back pocket almost every single weekend, Kai. What's your thoughts on the Auburn Tigers? And now that Nick Saban's not across the street anymore, perhaps does that mean another couple of wins? Obviously, you only play Alabama once.
Well, I look at Alabama's schedule like he was talking about before I get to Auburn, and I see 9 wins easily, and then you've got 3 games that they're probably not going to be favored. They may be favored with Georgia and Tuscaloosa. Then they have Tennessee in Knoxville. Who knows? And then Oklahoma. So I think they get 9 wins, and then you have 3 games right there to get your 10th win or another one. There's some things in there, but one of the older telltales is, but Alabama's minus 45 to make the playoffs. So their over/under is 9.5 games, but they're only minus 45 to make the playoffs. If Saban was the coach, what would those odds be? 300?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Point.
I pulled that, from left field. I'm just saying. But then, Auburn, you look at with a 7.5 win total over. So you would think they beat Alabama A&M. You would think Cal they would beat. New Mexico, who knows? They lost to New Mexico State last year, so maybe not. Auburn did. Arkansas they should beat, but Oklahoma, I don't know. Georgia, Missouri, they should beat Kentucky. They should beat Vandy. They should beat UL Monroe. So you've got 5 games to win 2 games there.
And 5 straight home games to start the season.
No.
Yeah, 5 straight games to start the season as well. It's going to be really interesting. And again, like you said, not everyone can go 10-2. You got a Georgia squad who obviously did not bring home the hardware, but at the same time, they're over under total 10.5. They got 16 starters coming back, but they arguably go from one of the easiest schedules I've ever seen in college football to one of the hardest schedules I've ever seen. Case, talk about those Georgia Bulldogs, and everyone going, well, okay, they fell off one year. They're obviously going to be back in the hunt. They'll certainly be one of those 12 teams, a shot at winning a national title, getting over 10.5.
Yeah, I don't even know if they fell off, to be honest. It's just like, look, it's hard to win national championships, obviously. They had so many close games. They were on the right side of a lot of them to win the last 2 national championships. I know that's not what we remember when they blow out TCU and have all those blowouts, but they barely lose to Alabama in a game they lost the turnover battle last year. If Georgia and Michigan played after the national championship last year, that game's coming in right around pick'em. Georgia might even close a slight favorite. They'd be a favorite over anyone in the nation again this year on a neutral field. It's kind of bad when I said I bet 10 SEC win totals. I don't really have that strong of opinion on Auburn, Alabama, or Georgia. Those are 3 of the teams I didn't bet at all. I still think talent-wise, Georgia just kind of dwarfs over everyone. I know there's been this big debate in college football circles right now if it's Ohio State or if it's Georgia. I think maybe at the very top level, Ohio State might have more talent, but from a depth standpoint, it seems like Kirby Smart's built this roster wisely. It seems like he's saying the right things, that he knows that it's going to take like a lot of depth. He's moaning and complaining that he doesn't even have more, but I think Georgia's high in talent is still going to be better than anything. I don't think they'll go undefeated, but I think 11 wins is way more likely than 10. So I'd still, if I had to make a pick on this, I would be over 10.5. It's juiced minus 130 right now. So again, that's not a win total, I bet, but I still think if I'm putting the SEC in tiers, Georgia is in a tier of their own. I think they probably lose either at Ole Miss or at Alabama. I'm not as high on Texas. That number at the market making books, at the books that are taking the biggest bets, now actually down to 10, kind of minus 110 both sides. I bet some under 10.5 on Texas at minus 150, I believe, earlier in the summer. So Texas to me is the one I'm kind of selling on a little bit for various reasons, but I still kind of expect Georgia to be there at the end of the day. But I think the 2 biggest trouble spots on the schedule to me are Alabama and Ole Miss.
For all of our plays, go to K4Wins.com, K4Wins.com. We got the 4Ks, Kip, Kai, Keefer, and Kurre. And of course, we're going to be giving you free plays throughout the entire year. You can also check out the starting over, or starting lineup, should I say. Starting over is a different group I'm on. the starting lineup, and we will be starting over as we start the new football season. You can check that show out, of course, on our YouTube channel. Just look up Keefer and Kurre in the starting lineup every single week. We give a bunch of plays on that as well. I did want to bring up one other team before we wrap this thing up, and of course, we're going to throw in some free plays to get ready for the year because the futures is what we're all about. But, normally when you have a great football program like an Alabama and Ohio State, I mean, consistently at least 8 wins, at least 9 wins. I mean, I can't imagine what Alabama fans would do if they actually only win 8 or 9 games this year. They'd be crying in their Wheaties for weeks on end. But I'm looking at Billy Napier's squad and the Florida Gators. I don't think I ever considered a team that won back-to-back championships in the 2000s to have an over-under win of 4.5. Tell me where that program is. Anyone can chime in and talk about. I mean, it just used to be, the Swamp used to be the worst place to play, and now a lot of people are scratching up Florida on their schedule as a W. Anybody want to hop on that?
I mean, who are they going to be favored over besides Samford and Central Florida on their schedule? I mean, they start with Miami, then they have Samford, Texas A&M, Mississippi State, and Starkville. Central Florida is in Gainesville, Tennessee's in Knoxville, Kentucky in Gainesville, Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State. Where do they get 5 wins? Where do they get 3?
It's going to be really tough. Even if they're favored against Central Florida, that's one of those games that you don't typically schedule because theoretically you have nothing to gain in that game. And believe me, Central Florida is going to come to Gainesville like marauders that finally are allowed to penetrate the gates of the sacred city. They're going to be so incentivized. I mean, the non-conference part of the schedule is ridiculous, picking up Miami and Central Florida this year on top of the SEC juggernaut they've got to negotiate. So I agree with you, Kai. I don't see them winning, even if they're improved a little bit this year. If Billy Napier manages to win 5 or even 6 games, he's probably coach of the year.
Yeah. There's no doubt.
I guess I have to be the
contrarian.
What's the word I'm looking for? Not confident, dissenter a little bit. I don't think Florida's going to be good. I think it's going to be a disaster. I think Napier probably doesn't get out of there, but you look at the bottom line and the schedule, there's been a lot of uproar about it. I agree. It's super tough. Probably the toughest ever in college football. But just from a talent perspective, this team's a little bit better than 4.5. I'm mostly a numbers guy, but I come up with numbers for all these teams, a composite with a lot of different ratings, some stuff with success rate, yards per play. I came out with them with 5.6 wins this year, which is not bowl eligible, still below Florida's bar. But when that dipped to 4.5, I just couldn't help but take a little bit of Florida over 4.5. I think Graham Mertz was a lot better than people realized last year. They had a tough schedule again last year. So I think maybe it's going to be a close call, but if you ask me to pin down a record, I'd say 5-7. And I did have to take a little bit of the over 4.5. I think they could beat Miami week 1. I think they have 2 free wins on the schedule. That's 3. Then if we really want to get down to projecting point spreads, even though they're going to be an underdog in a lot of those games, a lot of them are going to be close.
Yes.
10 or less. They had bad luck in close games last year. So I kind of feel like 5-7 is the most likely outcome. So I took some Florida over 4.5.
K4Wins.com.
Yeah, and real quick, Tony, I think this is a perfect example of when you're looking at the schedule and you just kind of say, oh, well, Florida's not going to be very good, and you chalk up W's for some of these teams. In the week-to-week grind, when you're playing all these high-profile games, going to Kentucky, going to Florida, going to even South Carolina or, other stops along the SEC trail, those are tough games to win. And a lot of times the other side's going to be more incentivized because teams are going to kind of look at those games that usually are pretty tough as a breather. I don't think they're going to get away with that this year. So I think there's going to be a lot more carnage at the top levels in games. We talked about Auburn. Let's wrap them up really quick before we get to some picks this week. Auburn, to me, has 2 swing game keys in their schedule. They're at Kentucky, which is I'm sorry, going to Lexington is not an easy payday. Mm-hmm. And they've got Texas A&M at home late in the year. I think at 7.5, they've got to win one of those games for sure and go no worse than 4-1 in their opening gauntlet. And I think Hugh Freeze, you talked about Kalen DeBoer, you guys, if he only wins 8 games, it's going to be a disaster. I thought it was interesting on our show this past week ago when Chip Lake confronted the legend from the Paul Feinbaum show, the Alabama Ultimate Homer, and said, if my coach wins 8 games this year, he's going to be coach of the year. If your coach wins 8 games, they're going to be looking to fire him.
Yeah.
So it's really kind of an interesting parallel.
All right, Kai, let's give us some plays here. We are going to come out with free plays every single week. And, of course, you can all check those plays out at K4Wins.com, K4Wins.com, or whatever we like. And, of course, this is where you're walking into the Golden Corral and you're the first customer in the door. Everything is available. Nothing's been touched yet. No one's spit on your food yet. And you can grab it and run with it and go to the window. But give me some of your plays in the first week.
I don't really like anything in week 0.
Okay.
I don't. I think that I would go with 2 futures. And unfortunately, I would have to go with Tennessee under 9. I think worst case scenario, you're going to get a push. And then South Carolina under 5.5. Those would be for their win total. Those would be the first 2 that I would throw out. All
right, Case, what you got?
I'm kind of with Kai. I hate this. I thought I liked Florida State. I still like Florida State. I bet them, especially now we're showing a -10 on the board, which I think we mentioned. What scares me is that -10 is at one of the sharpest books in the world, and all the recreational books are at 10.5. That's always kind of a telltale sign. The practice reports have been really poor for the offense. The DJU maybe doesn't have it together. I think Georgia Tech's defense is so suspect that Florida State can just line up, pound the ball with Roydell Williams and win. So just because I feel like I have to give a pick, I guess I would take the Florida State -10. On the starting lineup earlier in the summer, I believe I gave out SMU -23.5. That number, we've seen some UNR, some Nevada buyback. I don't know. This team's going to be really bad. As someone that lives in the state, I think even the fans of them know they're going to be. It's going to be a rough season. They're kind of rebuilding from scratch with Coach Choate over there. Now Chuba Purdy's hurt, so it feels real chalky. I'd have to be on both the favorites though if I had to make a play this weekend. Nothing I love though. Don't bet too big. Save your bullets. And since Kai and I matched on 2 plays, I should mention the other one. I don't know about the price now, but the very first bet I made this offseason was Oregon to win the national championship. I actually got 12-1, which I think is long gone. But maybe if you shop and look around, if you could still get a 10-1, I really think Oregon, talent-wise, is a lot closer to Georgia and Ohio State than people think. I think they might have been one of the best teams in the nation at the end of last year. They just couldn't get over the Washington hump. That's a credit to Kalen DeBoer and a feather in his cap if you're looking for Alabama to go over expectations. But I guess the 2 plays I've heard on this podcast that I wholeheartedly agree with, I bet Tennessee under 9. And I think Georgia wins the national championship if you're making me pick one team. But at price right now, I think Oregon, especially if you can still find a 10-1, a 9-1, I like Oregon to win the national championship.
Kip, what has caught your eye?
I've been saying it all summer. I think Texas is the vulnerable, really high, lofty team in the process. 10.5, even 10. The game in Austin, the same day as the Formula One race, Georgia, Texas is going to be a real pivotal game in the schedule. Assuming that Georgia goes in there and handles their business, I just see Texas losing 2 or 3 games. And the other thing against Texas, I think, is just, and Oklahoma's in the same boat. This is just strolling into a whole different jungle for them than they're accustomed to. There's always been 4 or 5 wins that were basically assured on their schedule. I don't think any haven in the SEC is really truly safe for either of these teams, particularly on the road. I think they're going to have some stumbles. So I am really strong on Texas under the 10.5 or 10. If you can get 10.5, jump all over that. That's been kind of my position on them all summer. And to a lesser extent, even Georgia, because if they don't win that game at Texas, Georgia's one of the only teams that has to play those 3 teams I mentioned before, Alabama and Texas and Ole Miss, all in the top 6 preseason, and they have to play all 3 of them on the road. I am not going to be stunned at the end of the day if Georgia and Texas are both 10-2. So, I've been saying all year that I think they're both vulnerable with that high win total. As far as I'm going to actually pick a game this weekend too. Well, not this weekend, but this week. I love North Carolina at Minnesota on Thursday night. The game's basically a pick 'em. I think it's been going back and forth. It's 1 or 1.5. I think North Carolina is actually favorite. Case can clarify that, but
2.5.
Okay, that's up that high. I like the Tar Heels. They're going to have a dynamic running back name a Mario Hampton, who's going to be an absolute beast this year, maybe a sleeper at some big numbers for even the Heisman, because I think they're going to ride him big time. I love the Tar Heels. I'm not impressed with the rest of the Big Ten, which is actually 18 teams now. We've talked about a couple of the high ones, or the most highly touted teams, but I don't really see the Minnesota Golden Gophers having very much. And I really like North Carolina on that opening Thursday coming up in this, what I guess can still considered week 0.
If there's one thing that I love as much as SEC football, man, it's the National Football League. I'm looking at the NFL big time already this year. A couple things kind of hit me. Of course, I'm a Cincinnati Bengals fan. They suck for so long. It's so good to actually see them in the mix every single year. Joe Burrow misses 7 games last year. He still has not been completely healthy for an entire year. I think with that offensive line, it looks like all 5 guys coming back. They should be super well. They did a great job in the draft. I'm going to take the Bengals plus $180 to win the AFC North. I think that's a price. I think they're right there in the mix with the Baltimore Ravens, who've got what is the Ravens, like a plus 110, 120? Not really sure why they're not a little more closer to what the Baltimore Ravens are doing, because I think if you put them on paper, they're really close. I love the Detroit Lions. What Dan Campbell's done with that squad has just been unbelievable. I love him as a coach. I would take him any day. They're plus $145 to win the NFC North. They did it last year. There's no reason why they can't do it again. And then I'm going to go with, I'm an old school guy. I love watching the Chicago Bears. Whenever college football is better, we were talking about FSU in the Miami days. College football is better when those teams are better. NFL is always better when the Chicago Bears are better. They just are. When the Chicago Bears are playing good football, they're over under 8.5. They got Caleb Williams coming from USC. I think he's going to play immediately, and I think he'd have an impact. They have the 4th easiest schedule in all of the National Football League schedule this year. I'm going to take the over 8.5 for Chicago Bears. You like the over as well, Kai? I'm going to take the over 8.5. And I still think a lot of people are looking at this schedule as a 16-game schedule. You're getting 17 games. It's probably going to be 18 within a year or two, but I love the over 8.5. I think that gives them a little wiggle room. I think actually because they're away schedule, they can actually lose a couple of games they're supposed to win and still get over that 8.5. So great stuff, guys. Check us out every single week, K4Wins.com. K4Wins.com. Check out our brand new website. It's fantastic. Kip, Kai, Keefer, and Kurre. We do it every single week. And, of course, you can find our podcast available on the Tony Kurre Radio Podcast Network. I've got it up on everything. And, of course, wherever you get your favorite podcast, you can find this wonderful podcast. We'll do it every single week right here on K4Wins.com. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate you, man.
Thanks, Tony.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.